He boarded the flight smiling, a successful black CEO, finally heading home after closing a deal that could change his company's future. But what began as a routine trip turned into a nightmare mid-air. The crew joked, laughed, and called it just a prank. Minutes later, his dignity was gone, and the cameras were rolling. By the time the plane landed, the world would know what they'd done. But no one expected what happened next, when the airline itself paid the ultimate price. Elijah Carter had built everything from scratch, a 38-year-old black CEO whose journey from a small-town kid to boardroom leader was the kind of story people admired but rarely understood. Calm, disciplined, and proud of his natural hair, he'd become the face of resilience and excellence in an industry that still doubted men like him. That morning, he packed light, a laptop, a crisp grey suit, and the confidence of someone who'd earned his place. The airport was just another stop between meetings, another flight on the schedule. But as he stepped onto that plane, he didn't know that a few careless smiles and whispered jokes from the staff would soon strip away more than just his peace. They'd test the very limits of his dignity. The flight had barely taken off when Elijah felt it, the strange shift in the air. The usual smiles of the flight attendants had turned into smirks that didn't quite reach their eyes. He tried to ignore it, focusing on his laptop, preparing notes for a conference that could secure hundreds of jobs back home. But the laughter, quiet at first, grew louder. He caught a glimpse of two crew members whispering, glancing his way, then turning back to giggle behind their hands. When one of them approached, he thought it was about the drink service. Instead, she reached out and touched his hair, uninvited. "It's so fluffy," she said, laughing. A few passengers looked up, confused. Others pretended not to see. Elijah forced a polite smile, the kind people of color learn to wear when the world crosses a line and expects them to stay calm. He leaned away, hoping it would end there. But it didn't. Minutes later, a male crew member appeared, holding a pair of electric clippers, the kind used for grooming beards. "Come on," he joked, waving it in the air. "Let's give the boss man a trim." The cabin filled with uneasy laughter. Someone pulled out a phone. Someone whispered, "Record this." Elijah froze. The moment felt unreal, as if time had split in half. One part of him sat there, trying to understand how professionals in uniform could think this was funny. The other part screamed silently, "Don't react. Don't make it worse." He'd work his entire life to be respected, to stand as proof that a black man could lead with dignity. And now, 30,000 feet above the ground, they were turning him into a spectacle. The first buzz of the clippers cut through the laughter like lightning. A guard-like attendant pressed his shoulder down. "Relax, it's just a joke," she said, still smiling. Elijah's heart pounded. Each vibration against his scalp burned humiliation deeper into his soul. The sound of the clippers, the flashes from passengers' phones, the smell of cheap disinfectant, every detail carved itself into his memory. When it was over, the cabin was quiet. The laughter died down, replaced by awkward silence. No one looked at him. No one apologized. His hair, his pride, his identity, lay scattered on the floor like something disposable. He sat there, trembling, staring at the reflection in the window. Outside, clouds drifted by, soft, white, and indifferent. Inside, he felt stripped bare. The man who had commanded boardrooms was now just another black man mocked for being himself. And then came the words that would haunt him. A passenger in first class muttered, "He should be grateful. They just had some fun." The crew laughed again, pretending it was all harmless. Elijah didn't respond. But something inside him shifted, something quiet, powerful, and irreversible. By the time the plane began its descent, he'd made a decision. This wasn't going to be forgotten. Not this time. Not again. When the plane landed, Elijah stood up slowly, the back of his neck still tingling where the clippers had buzzed away his hair. The laughter had stopped hours ago, but the shame hadn't. He walked down the aisle in silence, every step heavy with humiliation, and the camera phone still pointed his way. At the gate, he was met not with compassion, but with confusion. The captain smirked and said, "Hope you can take a joke, Mr. CEO." The crew chuckled behind him, as if nothing had happened. The crowd in the terminal turned to look, some in shock, others in silence, recording but not intervening. Elijah tried to speak, but the words caught in his throat. Years of being told to stay calm, to rise above it, and to not make a scene echoed in his head. But this time, something inside him broke free. He walked straight to the airline manager at the terminal, his voice shaking, his hands trembling, but his spirit unbroken. "Your staff shaved my head on that flight," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. Gasps rippled through the waiting passengers. "They called it a joke. I call it assault." The manager tried to usher him away, whispering about handling it privately. But Elijah didn't move. He turned to the phones recording him, to the stranger staring, and said clearly, "This is what happens when people think our pain is entertainment." By the time he left the airport, the clip was everywhere, millions of views, hashtags rising by the hour. What began as humiliation was transforming into outrage. The world was watching now, dissecting every second of that flight. And in that moment, beneath the harsh lights of the terminal, his scalp still raw and exposed, Elijah realized the truth. They'd tried to strip him of his pride. Instead, they'd handed him a weapon far more powerful. Because this time, the world wouldn't look away. In the days that followed, Elijah Carter's story spread across the world like wildfire. The video of that flight, of laughter, cruelty, and humiliation, sparked outrage in every corner of social media. Within 48 hours, protests erupted outside the airline's headquarters. Reporters swarmed the story, and executives scrambled to call it a misunderstanding. But the world had seen too much to be fooled by apologies. The airline suspended the crew, but the damage was irreversible. Investors pulled out. Flight bookings plummeted. And within months, the company that once mocked a man's identity for amusement was forced to shut its doors. Justice, for once, had found its way through public outrage. But for Elijah, the victory felt heavier than it looked. No apology could erase the sound of those clippers or the laughter that followed. He'd built his life proving that dignity and success could silence prejudice, but that day proved something deeper. Racism doesn't disappear just because you make it to the top. It hides in plain sight, waiting for a moment to remind you how fragile equality still is. Still, Elijah didn't stay silent. He spoke at universities, conferences, and online platforms, not as a victim, but as a voice. "They tried to take my dignity," he said once, standing before a packed crowd, but what they took instead was their mask. His story became more than a headline. It became a mirror. For every viewer who watched in disbelief, it asked the same haunting question. How many more times will we call cruelty a joke before we admit what it really is? Because the truth is, this wasn't just about one man on one flight. It was about every moment the world looks away and every voice that chooses silence over justice. And maybe, just maybe, this time, the world will finally listen.